Meet Marc Isaacs. He's a writer, director, actor, and producer.
He's done radio, he's done television, he's done the weather, he's done movies, he's done stand-up comedy, and he's even had a job working with autistic children.
Welcome to Scratch, Claw, Push, a podcast about artists clawing out a place for themselves in the world. I'm Billy Jo Cones.
And I'm Brandon Duke. Let's go. Welcome to the show, Mr. Marc Isaacs. I was just sitting around looking at my resume the other day, feeling very proud of myself. Then I looked at yours, and now I feel like a slacker.
Seriously.
I'm hoping you get some sleep, though, because I don't necessarily sleep a lot. So that's probably why my resume is so padded now.
Yeah.
No, I mean, if we want to talk about why I reached out to you in the first place and invited you on this, it really was those two videos that you had on TikTok/Instagram. I saw them on Insta, but detailing your entire work history. And I find it fascinating when people's work history is like boom, 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 and yours was just stellar. I gotta say, just. So we're gonna play this little game with our guests called "Tell Us About Your History in 60 seconds or less," and I'm gonna set a timer and then I'll just say beep when it's up. But basically, I'll just tell you when to go.
Resume.
This is your extremely short elevator pitch of yourself, of who you are, and yeah. So that's what we're gonna do. Just because I think it'll be fun. Because here's why we're doing this, because I went to a thing once and somebody was asked about themselves and they talked about themselves for 30 minutes. And I was like, okay, there's no interview. We only have an hour to talk to you. So 60 seconds and then we'll deep dive afterwards. Sound good?
That sounds great.
Awesome. Cool. And you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Go.
I started in radio broadcasting, and from there I transitioned from sales to on-air, jumped into TV weather, no meteorology degree, nothing, no weather forecasting degree, went into TV producing, news producing, and then went into freelance producing for places like ABC, CNN, program producing on my own with local stations in Houston. From there, I got into acting. I was acting professionally. I started doing more programming, joined an agency, an advertising agency for a while, worked there, created commercials for clients, jumped into the world of autism and was an autism aide and an ABA therapist, got back into production and was writing scripts and producing content, worked for another agency and was working for clients like Instagram and Facebook. And now I'm just basically working for myself, and I am writing scripts, and I am working on TV pilots, and I'm consulting other producers and writers on their projects. Was that 60 seconds? Did I do it all?
You had 4 left.
Rock and roll.
Wow. Beep. Okay. That's amazing. You're going to put all of our other guests to shame because I know they're not going to get through their whole work history in 60 seconds, but you just did. So you've proved it's possible, and thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Now, so the whole point of our show here is to talk to people about how they carve out room for their creativity. Brandon, anything else you want to share on that?
Yeah, it's these days, like it's become quite common for creatives to wear multiple hats, and you're a prime example of that. I'm looking at your IMDb page. 8 short film director credits, 27 writing credits, 16 producer credits, 62 acting credits. Again, like, when do you find time to sleep? I mean,
well, do you remember the scene in Goodfellas where Ray Liotta's character is tending to the spaghetti sauce and how like that becomes something really important? That was probably the pivotal thing for me to recognize that nothing has to be done today. Everything has to just keep being tended to, being nurtured, being brewed, being stirred. And so when I pivoted off of the thought that I had to create something right away, get it done, it kind of freed me up to say, this project might take some time. This acting thing might take some time. This writing thing might take some time. I don't need to break my neck to get it done. And so I would be having all these things going on simultaneously. And suddenly, one opportunity would come up where I'd be on set shooting something, and then I'd go home and I'd be writing something because I wasn't trying to start something new. Everything was in motion. That's
a really great point, because I think often the people who say, oh, well, I don't know how you do it all, or I don't know how, people find the time are often the people who are stuck in some sort of inertia, right? The people who are spinning lots of plates can keep them up in the air.
It reminds me of a quote I heard once that if you want something done, ask a busy person.
Yep.
Because there's something to be said for momentum. Because I didn't know, even with myself, it's like if I get a couple of things going, I can get a few more things going, and it's weird how that works. And your career certainly seems to be an example of that. Because I mean, just like so, like what. I mean, is it just one thing constantly feeding into another in that case, like the acting feeding into the writing, and then the writing into the directing, and the
Well, I
producing
mean, to
maybe?
be honest, I mean, some of it was coping. Like when I was living in LA in 2018, I went through a period of being homeless and I was bouncing from Airbnb to Airbnb. And I was coping by looking at history from where I'm from. I was looking at newspaper archives and reading stories about where I grew up long before, I was there long before my parents were there. And it was just a coping mechanism. And weirdly enough, the following year, I got invited to participate in a project that was set in the 1800s. And I'm like, oh, I've been looking at the 1800s. It was so much synchronicity that I was like depressed and looking at, researching just things, towns and places and times and language. And then somebody says, hey, we want you to be a part of this project and we want you to write it. And I started writing it thinking, I already know about where to find information about how people spoke and what newspapers look like and all that stuff. So to me, it's alignment. It's a matter of alignment. It's just letting yourself exist where you are and then seeing what that attracts, who that summons in your life.
And that's interesting that you put that out there, because that we probably read the same book, and I know we connected on this, but you're from upstate New York,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And Audrey Munson, the first supermodel, right? I read the book about her that came out, was it 2016, 2017 maybe? And also went to New York and just walked around looking for her because I was fascinated by her story. And I also became an artist model just so I could research what that's like, so I could do a project about it eventually, and not knowing whether that'll be a stage thing or a screenplay. And now you're writing a screenplay. So it's like, once again, synchronicities. And I've read a few different novels all in the same time period. I read a couple different novels that were all set in upstate New York. And so I kind of got fascinated with that area too. So yeah, all comes back around.
Well, it's a weird, my entry into her story is so bizarre. Like it's so
Yeah.
unexpected because I was working as a special education aide in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, and our school trip was to Madison. And I was like, I'm going to find some trivia for the kids. And I'm going to look up the building, the state capitol in Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm going to look for some fun facts. And I read about this model named Audrey Munson, and I start looking at her bio on Wikipedia, and I'm like, no way, she died. She died in my hometown, and I was working 2 miles away. Like, there's just no way that story comes to me in such a bizarre way. But I embraced it, and I started thinking this needs to be a story. But also, you mentioned upstate New York. What taps into for me is growing up in a place that's very rural, that's way away from New York City, that has nothing to do with New York City, that's kind of, to me, forgotten. I was always interested in the people who came out of that area who went on to great success, like Rick Carlisle, who played in the NBA and was a longtime coach, including a coach for the Mavericks in Dallas, Audrey Munson, who we mentioned. The first soccer-style kickers in the NFL are from my hometown. They were Hungarian refugees in the 50s. And went on to play in college in the pros. I've written a script about them. Frederick Remington, probably the most notable Western artist and sculptor, is from that area as well. So like I was always thinking as a kid that no one knows this area, not knowing that people from my area like went out into the world and did great things, but nobody knows where they're from. Nobody knows rural northern New York.
Right. No, that's a great point. Is like the things you don't really know about the place you're around, that's around you. And I also had noticed in your video that I watched that you had that Wisconsin connection. So this is something I'd love to include in our future interviews. But if anybody has a Wisconsin connection, I'm like, hello.
Just say bubbler. Just say bubbler. If you don't know bubbler, if you live in Wisconsin and don't know bubbler,
right,
you've not lived in Wisconsin.
No. How long were you there, or how did you end up there?
So my ex-wife and I have a daughter, and so my ex-wife moved to Wisconsin for work, to work in radio there, and I ended up just helped them move and followed them up. And I happened to be working a little bit of a part-time gig at my daughter's school to get familiar with her school, and someone approached me and said, you would be great working in special education. And I was like, I've never thought about working in a school, never thought about special education. But I think for me, it was a matter of having empathy with people in need and feeling like that's a role I could take on. And it's probably the only real role I've had in my professional career where it's so hands-on. It's not like writing where you're stepping back. It's not even like agency work where you're communicating, on Zoom or by phone. It's like you are in the space where the kid who needs your help needs your particular set of skills. And to me, I think that was what made my writing so much more real after that. It's because you're dealing with real people, real needs, urgency, immediacy. And I think it definitely flavored how I write things now about people in need and people in conflict.
That's really great, because they always say, like, for actors that if you only, socialize with other actors, if you only consume things, then you're just sort of regurgitating stuff that isn't real life. And so a lot of times you'll be encouraged to, like, get out there and have experiences, right? So that sounds like that sort of informed your other stuff. So it sounds like you have that informing your work, and then your upbringing or your hometown area. Is there anything else that you feel like, you draw inspiration from?
Definitely my daughter. I mean, she's just graduated high school yesterday. And when you think about characters who are in conflict, who are challenged, right? She's definitely been somebody I've watched and seen how she's been challenged in school through, having anxiety early on, missing a lot of school her freshman year, and then growing this career that got very much stronger in junior and senior year to the point where she's a brand new person, but she was facing those challenges in some ways head on. A lot of support from her mom, support from me. But I think when you see somebody in your own life who is in a difficult situation or difficult situations, and you recognize the talent in them, it definitely helps you look at the characters that you write and realize they're not just one dimensional. Like, they face things that real people face, and they face things that they don't always understand. Like, from the outside view as the writer, we're looking at them outside thinking, well, we can control and manipulate their situation, but in some ways we really can't. We have to let them make their choices and assess what's going on around them, and give them a sense of that the landscape in their stories isn't just a single path. We're not just trying to get them to the finish line. Maybe they'll fail, a couple times, maybe they'll succeed. But I think watching her is just, again, it's such a personal experience watching your own child navigate through life and all the difficulties that come with being a teenager and then getting to the other side and, now being a young adult and being successful. It's been amazing.
Yeah,
That's
I
awesome.
heard one of my I can't remember. I think either a friend or someone was explaining, like, watch. I guess they had a teenager as well, and they described it as watching them. They're kind of like, it's a period of careening between being a kid and an adult, just going back and forth until you eventually kind of land, hopefully closer to the adult phase. And like watching that whole, we've all been through it, but I'm sure it's like when you're watching it up close and personal, having already gone through it as a parent, that's got to be like a very different experience.
Well,
It's
they're raising you. I have to say, this is for me. They're raising us as well. So one thing that my daughter's pointed out is she said something like, you need to learn to ask for what you need. Like, she was telling me I need to advocate for myself, because I would imply things, I would hint things around her. And she'd say to me, like, you need to just tell me, like, what is it you want? What is it you need? And I started thinking, as I'm navigating my own career still and trying to grow a network and sell scripts and things like that, she's basically forcing me to say, like, to people, this is what I want. This is what I'm looking for. This is the specific pitch I'm making. This is my end game. Where I was probably for a long time under the sense of, like, well, people know what I want, right? If I'm writing, people know what I want to do. No, they don't necessarily know what that looks like, because no two writers are the same. No two professional artists are the same. So she's been a huge catalyst for me in, like, learning to advocate for myself.
Mark, that's really interesting. There's this, I don't know where this came from. There's a story I read that was about, it kind of reminds me of what you were saying about just the going from one thing to the next. But this is part of it too, is this idea that it was this little story about us being these little creatures, and these gods up above or whatever are looking down and seeing us when our light is lit up. And so the things we do that we love light up the light. And I think, like, telling people this is what I'm doing, or this is who I am, or this is what I want to do, this is what I care about, lights up that light too. And so if you think about it like that, then putting that out there is just like you have this beacon so that people can find you and help you, so that those synchronicities can happen and people can go, hey, you look like somebody who'd like to come work at this school because you seem like you would be this type of person. And you're like, wow, oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I would, right?
I found that in acting too. When I was doing auditions a lot regularly, and in Texas, you basically audition everywhere. So you were always on the road to, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin. And I remember a casting director saying that ignore what is on the page on the script about the character, even to the point of gender, right? Like she was mentioning, and her name is Beth Sepko, and she's amazing. She's cast a lot of big TV shows and movies here. And she talked about how she would look at a character, and it could be a male character, and she would bring in women. And she would bring women to, and in some cases they ended up getting booked and the script got changed, because she would say, like, you're an essence of a person. Your essence is what we cast you on, or your essence is why we call you in. And you realize it's the same thing with writing. Like when I show up and talk about the things I write and I care about, it's an essence. It's not information. People can walk away and go, yeah, that guy seems to like true stories a lot. Like he seems to like do a lot of research, and he's always in the newspaper archives. Like they basically summarize it as, this is how we see you. This is our takeaway. I may not know anything else about what you've written, but I know this. I can boil it down to, this is the thing you care about most. And if you don't know that for yourself, I think you might have navigating with much more struggle, like navigating this industry, because you're just trying to do everything. You're trying to say yes to everything instead of saying, I need to create, what is my lane, or what is my path, or who are my people that this stuff is going to resonate with. And like for me, it's not horror. I like comedy. I'm not a horror writer. I've helped collaborate on some horror stuff. It's not my genre, but I love stories about real people and real events, and I know that's where I feel at my best. So that's the kind of people I'm summoning to my life now.
That's a really amazing point that you just made about knowing where you belong. And it's something I talk about with people a lot. Is as an actor, when I was doing more on camera and theater, people will always say you have to be specific, right? So like I would say, and a lot of other actors will say, I just want to make money doing this. And now I'm like, that is not enough, because I made money as an Elmo at a birthday party princess, Mall of America princess, singing telegram person, reading palms, being a standardized patient at the medical school. All of those were paid acting jobs. Were they what I wanted to be doing? Not necessarily. And so I think like we do ourselves a disservice when we don't examine and also put out there what we really want.
Well, what is sustainable about that, right? Like what's sustainable about doing all those things? Maybe there's nothing. Maybe it is a gig work, approach to it. But how do you sustain a career if you're doing little by little, like little pieces? I did the standardized patient thing too. By the way, I recorded one of them secretly and I watched it back, and it's so much fun to watch yourself in a hidden camera style and watch the things that you do. As a standardized patient, I was very over the top. Like I would go, I was all in. In fact, when I did it once in Wisconsin, they pulled me aside and said, you're a little too intense for these people. Because I was 100%. I'm like, if I'm a drug user in this and I had a car accident, that's my backstory, I am all in on making this doctor's life a living hell.
Like, give me the stuff, doc. Give it to me.
Well, my whole goal was like, they give you 15 minutes to assess me. Like the doctor gets 15 minutes. I'm gonna burn his or her time. I'm gonna burn that time. I'm gonna give them very little information. So I'm gonna be like the case they talk about later about if you encounter this kind of guy. But it was so much fun.
That's amazing. I love that you have that on your resume too. That's great.
It reminds me, there was that movie that Jim Carrey did years ago. It's called Yes Man, where it's just they just like someone hypnotizes him and just like he'll just say yes to anything. And it's like seems to be like a really holistic approach to kind of like, I mean, you seem like the core of your work is like storytelling, and it definitely, like, talking to you now is like I can see that thread. It's just like, oh, like I've said to people before, like a little curiosity can go a long way. And I found like usually the best people I know in regards to storytelling are always the most curious and will pretty much get into anything and or everything.
Well, I had some experience going from radio into TV in a market where a lot of people did weather. Like they would come and have you fill in and do weather. And so I did fill in weather. And then I went from that market to a full-time job doing weather. And then I moved to a job where I was just producing. And nobody at this job where I was at, it was the ABC station in Albany, New York. And nobody knew I had done weather. So one day our WSI weather system crashed. Our meteorologist went home, and I was the producer of the new newscast. So I stepped in and said, "Oh, I'll do weather." The entire station was watching me to see me fail because none of them had a clue that I'd already done weather. So I went up, I knew the equipment, I did the forecast. I was comfortable. They're like, "Well, that was not satisfying. Like, we were looking for a blooper reel on you." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, guys. I actually did weather before this. So I'm sorry that none of you knew that. But yeah, I've already been in this situation."
I'm a ringer. I just step in and yeah. It's like the professional opera singer that goes to karaoke.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's hard though, because you don't walk into places in anywhere in this industry where people know your whole resume, so they don't know where you're coming from. So to me, like the beauty there is that you can pull out, like, whip out the surprise. What is surprising about you or about your background or your information or what scripts you're working on? When I'm talking about the true stories I work on, the scripts that I write, I probably don't always mention that I've written a comedy that has gotten 31 million views on YouTube, because it's not like in that vein, but sometimes it's actually been beneficial because people want to talk more about, well, how did that go about? Or were you part of the marketing? Were you part of the production? So it does become a conversation topic, but it's not necessarily my main focus, right? It's so far in another direction, but it still has value.
So of all the stuff you've done, like, what's the one thing I think that, or say, what has been like the things and or thing that was the most surprising that you found yourself getting into? You seem like a pretty naturally curious guy, but was there anything like that you said, wow, this is like, you find something that like genuinely surprised you, like how much you're into it, or a subject that was more interesting than you might have thought it would have been?
I was always interested in Westerns, so writing a Western was kind of a natural thing. I was the kind of kid who would look at my father's books on Westerns, and I was fascinated by like the most morbid stuff. Like, they used to stand people up in their coffins and advertise their work. Like, I would look at that kind of stuff. I think that the thing I'm most surprised by would be looking at the refugee story, the Hungarian refugee story that I wrote, and starting to dig into what life was like in Hungary in the Cold War. Because I'm not really a political writer. I'm not somebody who's really interested in politics, even though I'll track some stuff. As I started doing a deeper dive into that story and realizing like the Soviet occupation, what that meant, how students, kids at that time were being influenced by teachers who were, had allegiance to the Soviet Union, what that meant for the refugees who Eisenhower helped get out of Hungary, like tens of thousands came to the United States. I never thought of myself as that kind of person who was interested in like this big, political movement or this political Cold War, landscape that we were in at the time. And so that to me is a huge pivot to say, oh, I need to read about this, but I have an entry point still. It's like I have an entry point of a person, a family that was affected by it. So that's not like me just researching what I would call like world history or government. That's me going, okay, what's the recipe around these people? Why do they leave Hungary? Why do they have to leave? And what obstacles did they face in getting to the United States? So yeah, I never would have predicted that 10 years ago. That would never been on my plate.
That's interesting because my mom is a history teacher, mostly American history and civics and law and whatnot. And I'm the same way. Like, I think history is the most interesting when it really connects to how people lived at the time. Sorry, my voice is going out. The true stories of people and how the bigger events affected their lives, right?
Well, I think that in this case, if you're confused by it, like when you're entering a story like this, and this is a real story, right? These are real people. I think about the universals, right? Like, so these were two little boys who were playing soccer in Budapest, sometimes like with just a ball of socks, like a rolled up ball of socks. So that was their ball. And when they got their first ball, what was that like? Getting a first ball. And then when they had to leave, what was that like? What was it like leaving? They never had ridden in a car. before they escaped from Budapest. So, like, what was that like? What was their first time in the plane like when they got to America? What was the first time in their hotel like? So I started thinking of the fact that, you know, as a person who's now well beyond my childhood, like, what were those first like? And those are the stories to tell. One of my favorite parts of that story is the older boy, who we mainly focus on, Pete. He is staying at a retired couple's home in Saranac Lake, and he doesn't speak English. They don't speak Hungarian, and he's hungry in the middle of the night, and he goes to the kitchen and eats some food. He sees some cans he recognizes and eats the food, thinking it's sardines, not knowing it's cat food. And when I wrote that scene, it's like, it's nothing to do with him adapting to America. It's just a quirky little funny thing that happens when you're a fish out of water. Like, you just don't know how to navigate. And that's something too. I've been in that situation where I've been somewhere where I didn't know what the etiquette was or what the social cues were. And I did something that was probably a faux pas. That's the stuff I enjoy. I like characters who are awkward. I like characters who don't really know how to function in new spaces and do the wrong thing. Like, these boys got to a hotel, and instead of going downstairs, they didn't know how to get downstairs on the elevator. They climbed out the fire escape, and now they're climbing down. Like, that's something that, you know, if you don't know what you're doing, like, you're just going to try to find a solution, and it's going to lead to something hopefully, you know, visual and fun and something engaging and memorable for the audience.
I really want to read this script now.
Yeah, it sounds great. I love that. So I wanted to ask a little more because, you know, with the point of our podcast being about, you know, just creating room, I guess, was there any project that you had where you really felt like you needed to make room for it in a way that, you know, was difficult? And how did you do that?
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely. I have a project that's gone through many different versions. It started as a pilot. We shot a sizzle reel that I wrote the script and directed the sizzle reel. And then it moved from a pilot to a feature, and then back to a pilot. I mean, it's just to have all these incarnations. And the thing that we originally started with was this core story about the Old West and about, you know, a marshal and a Comanche girl and a newspaper reporter. And to me, I thought, like, that story's been done in so many ways. And where I was challenged was I was trying to pitch to the group that I'm working with on this that I want it to be through the lens of somebody looking back at ancestry and history. Because to me personally, like, I was raised in a white family outside of my Mohawk family, didn't meet my Mohawk family until I was in my mid-20s. Had that sort of sense of, like, this is an identity that's sort of lost, or it's in limbo, or it's on pause. So I thought this story really should be somebody in the future looking back and saying, I'm connected to these historic American events in the Old West. I have a connection, and how do I reconcile that connection? So even that went through different phases. Like, we had in the sizzle reel a guy in 2020 talking to his kids and grandkids and great-grandkids and revealing that he knew this information for like the last 50 years and hadn't told anybody. And then it took a turn where I wanted it to be more closer to, and this came after script coverage and things like that. So I wanted to make it closer to him getting the information. So it's not like he's sitting on it, he's old man. Now he's 40 and he's finding out for the first time at the height of Western culture in America, 1950. He's a Dallas firefighter. He is discovering that he has a connection to the Old West, but not the one he thinks. He's got a connection to both the Comanche and white settlers. So he's on both sides of the conflict. He's got some, he's got skin in the game, I guess, as a descendant, but doesn't know that. And he finds out at a time where there's a challenge to finding out, right? It's not like today where people celebrate more diversity more openly. It's at a time where, there'd be some shame for a white man in Dallas to be, openly saying, hey, I'm connected. I have history with the Comanche. So there's much more conflict. But that came from my own life, of looking at my own life and thinking, people don't know I have, I'm definitely white passing. People don't know that I have Native blood. I'm registered in First Nations Canada. I'm a member of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. I mean, in Ontario. So people don't know that walking around. I wanted that guy to have the same experience I had, as where he knows now, but people around him don't have a clue. And what does he do with that information? What does he do once he knows? Is there a creative outlet? Is there a friend he talks to? Is there a journey he goes on? Because I wanted to do something with my own story, but not write it as my own story. I wanted someone else to take on that burden creatively.
Wow. That's a great story. So how is it, I guess so, yeah, I'm just curious, how has it been a challenge to find the space for that? Or has it been?
Oh no, it definitely has been, because I can't take it all on at once, and while I'm doing other things, I have to come back to it. And what I find is coming back to it comes after like days or weeks of
Mm-hmm.
brewing on it, thinking about it, even in the back of my mind. And so if there's an idea I have, I used to want to just sit down right away, and I'd be tied up with something else, and I'd be frustrated because I couldn't just get back to it. Now I'm like, oh, if I have that idea, I don't forget the idea. I'm good at retaining ideas even without writing them down, because I know it's almost like I see the object, the script as an object, and there's like this one piece I'm adding to it visually. That's my sort of my cue. Is if it's like Play-Doh, right? It's blue Play-Doh, and I have a piece of red Play-Doh. I'm going to stick it, and I'm going to keep that as my sort of visual memory, that there's that extra piece I need to go back to. And then when I sit down, what I find is, because I've been thinking about it for weeks on end, I end up changing other things too, because I start realizing I've already been thinking about these characters. And it might be middle of the night. It might be like early in the morning. I have to find myself that time, whatever it looks like. So it might be like I have to get up a couple extra hours early, or I let myself at 1 o'clock in the morning try to go to bed and go, no, I can't sleep right now. I'm going to go sit and I'm going to go write this scene, and I'm going to get this done, and then I'm going to go to bed. And I'll go to bed a couple hours later going, oh, okay, now I'm good. Now it's out of my head and I can move on.
I have to ask, like, with the since you've gotten into acting, I find it like I find like a lot of the best actors that I've seen, like, they definitely have that storytelling aspect in mind. But they're usually it's more telling the story almost from the inside out versus, like, the writer maybe looking from the outside in, like that. And then plus, especially with your experience, like, I mean, obviously this looks, according to our notes, like, lived in upstate New York, lived in LA, San Antonio, Wisconsin. Those are all very different places. Just just tell us, like, how that, I'm like, it's obviously, like I said, you got a very holistic approach to the storytelling, art. Like, give us a little more about, like, how that, like, just about how all that kind of, like, what's the filtering process there of, like, does it go through is it like, does the writer brain kick in first and then getting to the acting brain, or is it the acting brain filtering into the writing brain, or is there like a set process? How does that normally go down for you?
I love the way you used to ask that. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily use filtering. I've used the word synthesizing in some ways. Like, it's like taking in information and you're synthesizing it. So writing is, for me, so conscious. It's so, like, I'm aware of that I'm thinking and observing, and I'm aware of where I am and who I'm talking to. And, like, for example, when I was in Queens last year, I was doing this, I was producing this project at a hospital, multiple hospitals run by the same people, and made some great context there, by the way. I was, like, surprised to meet one of the doctors we were profiling. His daughter, this is a whole side story, but his daughter is the executive producer of The Daily Show. So I was like, I was in a medical center, but still there was some entertainment connection. But with that was as a writer and visual thinker and director, I'm very aware of looking at things and paying attention to things. And I can't do that with acting, though, because if I start paying attention to too much and I start thinking about too much, then I can hear my own voice. I'm aware of how I look. So with acting, I have to let all that go. It has to be like a conscious, like, walk in, say your lines, do your thing, and be in the moment, and don't know too much. It's almost like you're taking half your brain and you're putting it in a little compartment, because if you start overthinking, if I start overthinking, even as somebody who's produced and directed, it'll mess my acting up, because then I start becoming too conscientious of things that I shouldn't be focusing on. Where's the camera? Where is this lit right? All that stuff. But to me is something somebody behind the camera should be paying attention to. I just have to be free. And also what I've noticed with that too is that when I get in that situation, having done the other side of the work, having done the writing and producing, if I'm in a project where I'm just acting, it is so liberating, because then I come in and I go, I can just play. I'm just here to play and be myself. And that's when all the synthesizing work is coming out. I'm not thinking about meeting people in Wisconsin or LA. It's there. Like, I reach for it and it's there. The comment, an accent, whatever that is, I've already been processing and synthesizing it. And it's cool. It's like having a tool belt that you just know the tool I need is already there, because I've spent months and years already, processing it and just whip it out and boom, it's there.
That's a great answer. It's there's something to be, I mean, but there's definitely something to be said for having that type of mind where you can just let this stuff just kind of marinate. I was out recently talking to a friend of mine who lives in LA, and like over the pandemic, I got into all these different like YouTube channels, and one of my favorites is this guy who does cocktails, and he's not just making the drinks, he's telling you the whole history of that stuff. And I was telling my friend about it, and he's like, yeah, man, I just can't get into that. It's just overwhelming. But like, you're going to watch that and it's just going to sit in your brain and you're going to just absorb it all. And I never thought about it like that. It's just because I guess I feel like similar to you, like you just take that stuff in and it just kind of lives there and it's percolating, it's marinating. And then eventually when it comes time for it to find its way out, I guess for you, excuse me, whether it's like you're going to use it in a part for acting or if it's going to be in a script, that I find like it's one of those things that I guess if you think like that, you take it for granted, but not everyone does.
It's good residue. I call it good residue, right? Like there's good and bad residue. The bad residue is somebody telling us something about ourselves and us personalizing it, and there it is sticking in our brain like we're not worthy of being in that room, or somehow like we're not adequate. And the good residue is the stuff that hopefully that sticks, and you reflect on and go, yeah, this is something that is positive and it's always going to help me. And it may linger there a long time. We don't know how long that's going to linger there. And suddenly you're like, realize, oh, I do have that experience, or I do have that memory, or do have those words of encouragement that I could tap into, whether there's output, right? Whether it's acting, performance, or writing, or whether it's just feeling good about yourself, like feeling positive that you're capable of taking something on. For me, it's always about the challenge. Like, I want to be challenged. I want someone to say, I know you've done this, but can you do this? And which is maybe completely different, a completely different field, a completely different challenge. And to me, that is probably the most exciting thing. Is I'm not showing you what I'm good at. Now I'm stepping into your world and thinking, oh, how do I take what I know and step in this and try to master it, as much as I can.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it's you almost have to have like a why not me mindset, instead of everyone, like so many people they'll shoot themselves down before they've ever really gotten started, like, oh, I'm not good enough to be here, I don't know enough about this. But at the same time, I'm sure we've all seen movies, or we've seen someone do something and you just go, oh, I could do so much better than that, come on now. And you got like, I love to see people when they have says like, well, why not me? Why don't I take my shot? Has that been like just a thing that has just driven you from like the numerous things on your resume? Like just one's like, hey, why not?
Well, I think part of it's working with people too. Like I've produced a lot of content where I'm profiling a person who's got this amazing story. Like this one woman I met years ago, quit her job as a CFO, has started a company where she's making chocolate covered strawberries. So she's like walking away from a 7-figure job to be an entrepreneur. And then as her story moves along, she ended up getting her product into the Oscar gift baskets. And so she's getting direct calls from Spielberg and Hanks and people like that who are getting her product. And I look at people like that and I think, I can see the value of them telling their story. I'm working with them. I'm helping them escalate, and elevate their story in a way that I can do. And that's been a lot of it too for me, is I'm just around these people who do amazing things. I met the co-creator of Chicken Soup for the Soul, who said they had pitched the book series to like 30 different publishers and got rejected. And so those people to me remind me that, yeah, we all come from a place where we may feel inadequate and we have to work at it. And even if we have something that's rock solid, it's a winning idea, it doesn't mean that we're entitled to a yes on day one. Like we're still going to have to find people who are aligned with us, people who are interested, people who are like, who want to help us. It doesn't matter how gifted we are in making something. If we can't find the team around us to build us up, it's just going to sit on our laptops and, die a slow death. You got to get that out there and find people who believe in you. And I think that's been the biggest thing for me is seeing how those people have navigated it and not given up. And said, I've got this idea. It's going to go to market somehow, one way or the other.
Mark, so one thing that occurs to me listening to you talk about all of this, when you were talking about the ideas sort of percolating in the background and how you come back to them later, that all of this stuff kind of ends up snowballing, right? like you're working on something in the background, your brain's hard at work at that without you being conscious of it. You can continually come back to it. It resurfaces, right? And then you're in the meantime working on these other projects with other people. And so much of creativity is, I think the people who are stuck, what they don't necessarily do is keep moving forward, even if they're not working on their thing. And so what I'm hearing you talk about is working with other people, bringing their stories to light, doing different things. I think all the ideas that you are being exposed to, the people you're being exposed to, I know for me personally, this has happened, but that all of these things start to fertilize, right? Where it'll snowball into something, it'll become something because you've had these connections, permutations of creative connection, right? Would you say that that's kind of true, that you've had that, that things have grown out of other things?
Most definitely. I mean, I was on, during the pandemic, I was on a call with a producer in LA. He was hosting these regular meetings where people just get on and network, and we're all out of work and trying to figure out what to do. And I met a couple through that, and we were in a breakout room, and it was very small. And I didn't say much to them, and they didn't say much to me. We really didn't interact much, but they said they had made this short film. And so afterwards, I watched the short film. I responded to them. I gave them feedback, and then we started collaborating. They joined me on the collaboration of the Western project that we've been working on for the last couple of years. And it all came from me saying, I'm going to watch that thing. It has nothing to do with what I'm interested in. It has nothing to do with anything I'm working on. I'm just going to watch that film. And if I'm so moved, I will respond and let them know what I thought, because I wanted that. I wanted somebody to say to me, hey, I caught your film, something you acted in at a film festival, and enjoyed your work. So it's kind of like that, be the change you want to see in the world. I did that. I'm overly pitching myself to these people. We hit it off, and we started this session of like weekly Zoom meetings to work on scripts together. It was the first time I did an ongoing collaboration, and it came from just watching their film and having the courage to say, I think we're going to talk. I think we're going to like each other. I think we might work well together. And it was also nice too to like look at something from the outside that I didn't have anything to do with, watch their film, give them feedback, get a sense of how they think and how they interact with me. And I think the underlying thing for me is how I see other people is they need lifting up too. So when you're reaching out to someone else who needs help, right, you're using the skills and tools that you've got to help them. They may not see the value in what they're doing. They may need that reminder. And so it's like my daughter who like teaches me things to remember how to learn them herself. It's just natural for her to try to teach me something or teach your mom something. I think it's the same way with creative people. Like you lend a hand, help them out. You find that it does build you up too, because you're using something that you needed and you're helping somebody in the meantime. Like you're just giving them it could be technical advice. It could be writing advice. It could be just a pat on the back saying, hey, that's great. Let's keep it going.
That leads.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. So no, I was just saying, no, it's fascinating you talk about that, because nowadays it seems like so many people that are out there that become successful at doing the thing are people who are good at like building up networks. It's no longer, I mean, it used to be in the old days, if you wanted to be like someone who produced like a radio show or TV something, you had to go to the gatekeepers. The gatekeepers let you in, and they throw it out there to the world. Whereas now this is a lot more, because with the internet and social media and places like YouTube and being able to do podcasts and God knows how many different, platforms, it's like you kind of have to go out there and be the, you're kind of like your own ambassador and having to form all this stuff kind of like organically on your own, which is great, but it's also like a different challenge. Like, Tom, are you someone that, do you consider yourself more extroverted or introverted, or is it just, you just kind of like, it's whatever you have to be in the moment?
It's funny you say that, because I was working last week. I was directing a production of cricket. Some cricket teams in Texas were competing in DC, and I was working with a photographer there, a still photographer, and he was commenting that he's like, you're just nonstop. You got so much energy. You can talk. I said, this is only right now. I said, if you see me, I'm going to check out at some point. I'm going to like take my moment. And I said, if I'm at home, probably more so. Like I'm far more introverted. I'm at the point where this is how introverted I am. I'll tell you, there's a guy who sits across the street who's retired, and he's there every morning. And if I walk outside, he's going to say good morning to me. I've gone out the back and around to the car to avoid saying, and he's a nice guy. But there's moments where I'm like, I recognize that I just want space. I don't want to engage. I need my personal space. I'm probably more introverted than extroverted. But if you ask everyone I know, almost no one will tell you that, because they see me in my extroverted moments. They see me in public, or if they see me perform, like they know that that's how I am to them, but they don't see me when the rest of the time where I'm writing. I'm not an extrovert when I'm writing. I'm very much in my head. I don't want to be disturbed. I don't want to perform. If I watch a movie, I don't like watching movies with people often because I feel like it's a performance. Like, am I laughing at the right time? Like I'm very self-aware in that case. I prefer watching things by myself because then I can react how I naturally would react. I'll laugh out loud. I might, if it's sad, I might cry, but I don't want that to be a performance for other people to watch.
So it sounds like you're a not shy introvert.
Yes.
I think Robin Williams once quoted the terms like on-site extrovert, because from what I've heard about him, like that he could be like, when he was kind of off on his own, he could be very much just kind of like, not the way you think of him, where you let him loose on stage and it's just like his brain explodes for all to see. And it's awesome. And he's funny, but I've also heard like he had that flip side where he could just be like off on his own.
Well, I hosted years ago. I got hired to host a pageant, and it was just this pageant with all these, women, beautiful women, and all these things. And I'm like, this is not my gig. And I got there and I found myself, speaking of Robin Williams, I found myself making connections and saying things that I'm like, I don't even know where this is coming from. So if I'm in a position where I'm the one hired, I'm the hired gun, I'm the one hosting, I'm the one that's organized it, I'm great. I'll walk in and be absolutely extroverted. If I'm coming in as a guest, no. If I'm coming in as somebody who's just part of the audience, I revert to my natural introverted self. But man, you hand me the microphone and you give me the audience, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I have a chance to talk and no one's going to interrupt me.
That's awesome.
That's great. I had a thought. I was going to ask you about something because you were talking about. It's gone. Anyway, I can identify with the introvert thing only because I am not an introvert. I used to live with an introvert who, when someone would knock on the door, he'd literally just run in the other room and pretend he wasn't home. So I hear you with the neighbor thing.
I think there's a limit to introversion, because I noticed a lot of people during the pandemic who thought they were introverts. Like, I'm just going to go work at home and it's going to be great. And then like after about like 2 weeks, there's like, I need people.
You find yourself going to the grocery store like, hi, how's everyone doing? Is everyone okay? I must have a human connection.
Say,
hey, how about those bananas?
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. Yeah, so we have about 10 minutes left. What else? Anything else we want to ask Marc about?
So like, what's the latest? Like, what's going on now?
So let me tell you a really cool story. So this is about summoning people to you, right? So I put out in Facebook that I'm working on this script that's about me as a kid. In fact, I have the actual, like, my first scrapbook, my first Yankee scrapbook that I made as a kid. And this is like, it's even dated, and I have like my favorite baseball star in here, Ron Guidry from Louisiana. And so I wrote a whole script, right? So I posted on Facebook and I said, hey, my Yankee fan script from when I was a kid is on its third draft or second draft or something like that at the time. It's up to the fifth now. But I put that on Facebook, and a woman who's a filmmaker in Dallas said, oh, you should connect with my friends. She'd be interested in what you're doing. And it's sort of that one of those vague things. You're like, is this person a producer? Who is this person? So she gave me the person's name, the woman's name, and she's like, you can find her on Facebook. So there was no formal introduction. It wasn't like, hey, Marc, this is Mindy. Mindy, this is Marc. Marc's working on this Yankee script. Mindy is XYZ. None of that. So I just contact Mindy, and I find her name. I contact her on Facebook. I tell her who I am. Well, Mindy, it turns out, is the wife of the New York Yankees president. Oh. So mind blown. I'm like, I'm sending my script to the Yankees president's wife. Like, what? And so she saw an early draft and gave me a lot of great feedback. And so she now has the latest draft, and I gave her the latest draft that has now the voiceover, some narration done by a former Yankee. which she loved that idea too. So now I'm connected to the team in some really interesting way, in so much as when I was in New York last fall, I happened to be shooting the hospital thing I mentioned earlier in October during the playoffs. And all I did was say, "Hey, I'm in New York. Just want to let you know, excited for the Yankees in the playoffs against the Guardians." She said, "What night would you like to go to the game?" And so she got me a ticket, a playoff ticket that would have been like out of my budget. And I went and saw the Yankees play at Yankee Stadium, in the new Yankee Stadium, for the first time. And so that to me is like such a great story about just put out to the world what you're looking for, what you're about. And without an ask, I wasn't asking for anything. Just put out to the world and see what kind of fruit, comes in just by being authentic about what you're doing and attract the right people.
That's such an amazing story. And that actually brings me back to what I was going to ask you about, because you were talking about reaching out to that couple. And I talked to a lot of people who are, I have one friend in particular who is on LinkedIn, but, we were talking about LinkedIn, and I was, I've taken a huge course about it. And I was telling him a little bit more about like how I thought he could reach out, and, because he's looking for work. And he was saying something about not wanting to connect with people who he knew from, like, people he knows in real life, but people who he hasn't been in contact with in a long time. Because I said, just get as many connections as you can. Doesn't matter who they are, especially if you know them from the past. And he's like, oh, but then I feel like I'm using them to please the algorithm or whatever. And I was like, well, what if you flip that on its head and think, I am somebody who offers something of value in the world. I might have something of value to offer this person. And as long as you're coming at it with that generous mindset of, I am willing to help anyone else who needs help, then why would they not be flattered that you remembered them, that you reached out? And yeah, as long as you're not coming to them and saying, hey, can you give me work? Then what is wrong with that? So I'm curious what advice, you kind of just said a little bit, but do you have any advice for those people who struggle with that thought in their head of feeling like that they can't ask for what they need?
I do, actually. And it comes from the fact that in my experience, it's been hard. It's been very challenging to share something with somebody and get actual feedback. Like, I've sent scripts to people. I've sent links to people. Someone will watch something, right? An average person might watch it, but it's not like they're conscious of, I'm going to give you feedback. I did watch that short film, or I did read the script that you sent me, and here's what I thought. And if you have to chase them, it's a little demoralizing to feel like it's not of value enough to them to respond. So my thought is, if you want to get someone's attention, just read something they wrote, respond to something they said, be a person who actively comments. And I find this on all social media platforms. Like, I'm connected on Twitter with some of television writers who I've met at workshops. Comment on what they say, respond, but don't comment with, hey, check out my work. Comment as a person. Be a person. And this is something I learned as an actor, is casting directors would say, I don't need your resume. Come in this room and be a person. Like, ask me how I'm doing. Tell me something cool that happened in your life. Share something that's about you, your child, your family, a vacation. Don't try to sell me. Just create a relationship. And that, to me, is all about, in our industry, watch, read, respond. Like, give somebody a sense that their work is important enough for you to take time, 5 minutes or an hour or whatever, and look at it and respond. I said, that will blow minds. It will blow minds if you read someone's script and you respond to them. So when I've read someone's, feature, I've given them like 3 pages of notes. They're not paying me for script coverage. I'm saying, I'll give you my response. You take it or leave it, but I'll give you how I'm moving through this story and what I'm expecting to happen and what I like. And I'll do it in real time. I'll type those notes as I'm reading. Because there's value. You're basically elevating someone to a level of importance. So why not build a relationship on making them feel good from the very beginning, not having them have to jump through hoops to get your attention?
Have you heard that
artistic karma?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that quote about to be interesting, be interested, right? That's a really, thank you for that response.
You're welcome.
It's great.
That's better than the flip side. If you're bored, then you're boring.
Yes. Well, and I think sometimes too with people who, like, when we create we definitely create our own spaces, right? So when we create, like, especially with a script, you're writing it in your own space, your own head, your own laptop, your own room. Putting it out there is a little weird. It's a little uncomfortable. And so sometimes I think you miss the reality that, like, I've written things and had feedback and someone says, I don't get that, or I would do this instead. And it's not a rejection of my work. It's like, it didn't mean something to them. But I might have been written in too insulated of a way where I'm only seeing my perspective and not seeing what someone else's perspective might be, or not realizing that I'm not conveying the message that I thought it was conveying. And I need that outside feedback.
Well, I think sometimes too, like, they'll say, like, if you're branding yourself, for instance, a good brand will reject as many people as it connects to, right? That you want to be specific enough to be something and not be generic, right? So I wonder if there's a little bit of that in there too.
Well, that lesson actually came in my first job. So my first professional job was doing radio sales in an unrated market in my hometown, but with people who are savvy. The woman who owned the stations, I think, was the first woman to be president of the New York State Broadcasters Association. So she ran this really small market station with such an amazing, powerful way. And I would go get trained to go do sales with, people who might have advertised in the newspaper, a tangible like newspaper, or in a flyer and a calendar or things like that. And here was this intangible in radio, and they would try to pack everything into an ad. And so the sales team of the owner and the sales manager would say to me in these meetings that it's the offer. What is the offer? What does McDonald's do on a national level? They don't advertise everything, right? They talk about one thing. It's the Big Mac, right? Or it's the shake. And so that was the guidance I got even back then when I was first starting in broadcasting, that when you're selling something, get somebody hooked by one thing. Don't try to sell everything yet. Don't try to sell your range. As an actor, don't try to sell everything you can do. You're going in for one role. If you're pitching a script, focus on the thing that script is about. That advice came early, and I think it's probably sustained me in so many ways that you can't show all your cards to people along the way because no one can process that much information, and no one's going to think of you as the comedy writer, the horror writer, the drama writer, the Western writer. They might think of you as the person who talks about characters with complex identity issues or who deal with trauma, or like I do. They might focus on those particular themes, but you don't need to be showing them everything you can possibly do, because then you're not basically nothing to anybody, right? You're not something to them. You're just basically like, you're the generic person.
Absolutely. Well, this conversation has been so, it's great. I'm very pleased that our first conversation is going. Just give ourselves a little round of applause.
Admittedly, you have made a fan here today, sir.
Thank you, Brandon.
I got introduced you through Billy, it's as I say, I've frequently been like irritated by like people I've seen in my life who are just not willing to put themselves out there. Like I've known really, I was complaining to my wife the other night that like one of the most talented people I know is a guy like didn't put himself out there. He's just completely out of the game now. But I mean, he's got a good life. He's happy. But I mean, like literally, like he was one of the best writers, was a director, could act, but just he just didn't have that thing to just get himself out there. And so like seeing someone like yourself who's doing that and then just seeing it kind of like land in so many places, it does my artistic heart a lot of good.
Well, Brandon and Billy Joe, you guys have been great to talk to. And I want people to feel like what they have is important in getting out there, but it's not going to necessarily come out in the way you think, right? Like at the end game, it doesn't just show up in how you designed it. We go through so many twists and turns in this business that your success probably won't look anything like you imagine it right now. Whatever that is, whether it's a podcast or a script or a TV show, like it's not going to come out that way. That's just not how. And that's not how life works, right? We're all squeezed like diamonds, and so our shapes are going to end up however they end up, and we probably have very little control over that too.
Well, thank you so much for sharing everything today. Before we wrap up, I do want to, have you share like where people can find you, follow you, because I found you on Instagram. That's how we got connected, but you're on TikTok and other places. So wherever you want to share for people to find you, feel free to do that, and we can put it in the show notes too.
Yeah, sure. Like I adopted years ago when I was at a writing job at an agency where I adopted word masseur in honor of my mom's French roots as my title. Like I'm not a writer, I'm a word masseur. So word masseur is probably where people can find me, like on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn. And TikTok, though, I'm using my full name, Marc Isaacs .310. Although I think you might be able to find me as Word Masseur there too. But TikTok's a fun place, fun platform, because I tell stories there. Like I just basically, I just tell stories on TikTok that are just true stories about weird things that have happened in my life. And I love when people respond and like find connections in the things I say or add their own related stories. So that's been a real fun platform for me to explore lately.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being here.
You're so welcome.
Sure.
You guys have been amazing.
That will be all for this episode. To keep up with the show, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Scratch Claw Push. If social media isn't your thing, you can contact us at scratchclawpush@gmail.com. This podcast has been a Carcutta Media production. For a full list of our podcasts, go to carcuttamedia.com/podcasts. This recording, or any portion thereof, may not be reproduced or used in any manner whatsoever without the express written permission of the publisher, except for use of brief quotations in a review. Copyright 2023 by Carcutta Media, LLC. All rights reserved.